Everybody, thank you for being here. This is our last session before the cocktails. I know some people may have actually got a chance to get a glass of champagne, it looked like, before. But this session here is holding Carol and I from being able to go have a cocktail ourselves.
Our own.
Yes. But thank you. Welcome to the Fireside Chat. I'm truly honored to have Carol Browner back with us. She was here last year as well. Carol has been a prominent figure in the environmental policy and advocacy for many years. She is the longest serving administrator of the United States in EPA, where she played a crucial role in implementing key environmental regulations and initiatives. Carol also served as assistant to President Barack Obama and director of the White House Office of Energy and Climate Change Policy. She's currently of counsel at Covington. And serves on a couple of boards, including Bunge, the large agricultural company, and sits on the board of the League of Conservation Voters. I've had the privilege of knowing Carol for nearly 20 years. We've surely seen the political pendulum swing back and forth over those years, but it seems the pendulum swung further in the last year than I ever remember it. I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of that. But before we dig in on the political side, we had a full day here with people speaking on capital markets, infrastructure, renewables, fuels, and there was very large international contingent, folks from Europe. But just before our session here, we had partners of ours from Korea, earlier in the day, Saudi Arabia. And then we talked about things like hydrogen and nuclear that are not something that I've seen a lot in these conferences over the years. So I'm curious, do any of those themes stand out surprising to you as you kind of walk around and think about the agendas that we've been talking about?
Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to be back here again, and for all that you guys are doing. You know, I've been, like you, coming to these for a very, very long time, going to the COPs for a very, very long time, and there's always something that surprises you. You kind of go in remembering the year before, and I think you've mentioned the political changes, they are significant. What is surprising to me this year, everyone's showed up, and everyone's still talking about what they're going to do. You know, they may not be talking about it in the New York Times, on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but there's really, you know, an ongoing commitment. I think, so that's very heartening. And then I think talking about different types of solutions. And so you mentioned nuclear, for example. You know, I said this to you earlier, 20-some years ago, I was a good environmentalist all my life, and that meant you just opposed nuclear, no questions asked. It just went with the territory. And I was writing an article, and I was thinking about nuclear power in ways that I hadn't previously thought about it, and I thought, why am I opposing this? It's carbon-free, it's actually, you know, from an air pollution standpoint, it's really clean. And so I publicly changed my position and said I was pro-nuclear power, and people like the Sierra Club were after me. But today, the good news is all of the environmental community has sort of moved to this position. And I think, you know, the fact that that is a conversation in your meeting today, the fact that hydrogen is a conversation, I think is a testament to an openness to discuss sort of a whole array of solutions as we try and, you know, really address the growing demand for energy, which is significant, and the infrastructure that will come with that, and the water demands that will come with that.
Well, that touches on a couple things that I wanted to chat with you about. The demand that's coming from AI is quite interesting to me. You know, I started my career in the space in the energy markets in the 90s around energy deregulation, and then the first markets to open up. And from about that time until now, you really haven't seen a lot of load growth. In fact, you've seen it drop here in the U.S. So the executives that are in charge of these utilities today have never been they weren't in charge then. So, you know, a lot of these executives have never actually seen growth here, and there's this demand that is forecasted to grow meaningfully for the foreseeable future. So, you know, the question is, how do these companies address growth and at the same time address clean energy. The way I understand it, someone else said in a panel sitting in this chair, I think earlier today, that the AI companies are largely looking at 3 criteria. The first criterion is availability of power, the second price, and then, climate, and the second or third price. And then very much in that order, and I'd probably say, from what I understand, availability, and then all those other things. Any insights how you think about those companies and how they might be able to participate in these markets?
I think the question, the demand, as you say, the question that's going to be on the table and that's going to be in the politics as we come into a midterm election is affordability. Because when the prices associated with the increased demand start to hit people in their pocketbooks, when public service commissions, when governors, all of these folks have to start to deal with this reality. Now, it won't be every state in the country, but it will be significant. And in some places, you're already starting to see it. I think this is going to be sort of a big wake-up call. And whether or not you will see the administration reverse some of its positions on things like solar, right, which would be a cost-effective way to rapidly meet the increasing demand, will be interesting. But I think you're going to see lots and lots of candidates running on the affordability issue. It's beginning to feel, probably most of us aren't old enough, but back in the early 70s when Jimmy Carter was president and we had the gas lines, and there was a whole generation of members of Congress who got elected on that. How many people remember Jimmy Carter? Okay, well, we were young.
Yes.
And so I think we're that kind of conversation. It's funny, Obama used to say this thing about people don't ever think about electricity except when they don't have it, right? When suddenly the lights go out, there's a storm or something. And I think that's probably true, but I think that's changing. And I think this will change it dramatically.
Yeah, when I first started working in electricity markets and they were deregulated, most people didn't know they had even been deregulated.
Right.
It wasn't part of there. You kind of touched on it, your move towards supporting nuclear power, but what other pragmatic changes do you think that the environmental community can make to help support, address these challenges, both the environmental but also the affordability problem, which I certainly agree is front and center?
I think the environmental community, we spent a lot of time getting to know. It was, NIMBYs, et cetera, and I think the question is how to get to yes in a fair and just manner. Whether it's to address things like the housing crisis, whether it's to address we need more electricity, so affordability, transmission lines, climate on a broader scale, how to reap the advantages of AI. The environmental community, I think, is going to have to sort of rethink how it engages. And I think permitting is the place where you could, hopefully have a genuine conversation about how we don't just say no, but we sometimes say yes. It'll be hard. It's not in the DNA.
I was going to say, you see it coming together in any way like that, or?
Well, so I was mentioned to you, I had lunch before I came over with about a dozen chief sustainability officers of very major companies. There was mostly women in the room, interestingly, but they all had these big jobs. And I walked away, again, encouraged because they talked about how they're, adhering to their work. One exception is the banking companies. I'll put them aside for a second. But the way I started to think about it is there's sort of the why, the what, and the how. And the why, and so how we talk about these issues, the why is, why am I doing climate work? Why is a company in today's political landscape continuing to do its climate work? And historically, it's been a moral, right? It's the right thing to do, it's good for the planet, and I think it's transitioning over to materiality, right? It's good for my business. And I think that's a really important transition, and one that the environmental community will want to, I think should be supportive of and engage on. So there's the why. The what are the targets and timetables? And let's just be candid, we're going to miss them, right? Most companies are going to miss them, and the concern as we think about climate is people say, well, you had this grand experiment, you made all these commitments, you had these targets, your timetables, didn't work, so let's move on. I think starting to have a conversation about why the targets and timetables have proven to be so difficult, well-intentioned, but nevertheless not achievable. And that gets you to the how. And that we really should start thinking about evaluating companies on how are they doing the work. Not did they hit this number at this date, but what's the journey they're on? How are they doing it? A simple example is, have they embedded climate issues in the KPIs for the CEO? Have they really moved the work into the business lines as opposed to, simply having, an office over here who puts out a feel-good report? And I think there's a lot of conversation that could be had around the how that could be really important to sustaining this work over a period of time.
So on that point, what recommendations would you have to companies that are trying to navigate through this? We work across over 60 countries at Expansive, and what's happening in various regions is very different around the world. But a lot of the companies we work with are global, so they're navigating U.S. politics, EU politics, could be, as I was saying earlier, Korea, elsewhere. And trying to navigate through all these various activities. Do you have any advice that you would give those chief sustainable officers or a person like myself sitting in the CEO seat trying to navigate through those?
Yeah, I think it's very tricky. And as you know, we spend a lot of time with clients helping them navigate through all of that. I think you have to be consistent. And you have to, which means you can't try and say one thing over here and another thing over there. That will eventually catch up with you. And so I think that's probably the most important thing, is to have the consistency. To the degree transparency is relevant, then you need to be transparent. But what I saw today, and these are global companies, almost all of them operating around the world, is one person said, it was funny, she said, we've been on a hamster wheel and we finally got to get off. It's sort of slowed down for a moment, and we can kind of get the house in order, we can get the compliance systems in order. And then another person said, but a day of reckoning will come, so you can't quit. And I think that's right. Again, we'll have an election, we'll have another election, the pendulum will swing, something will happen in Europe, something will happen here. And so I think embedding your work on climate, embedding your work on sustainability in your business and your CapEx decisions, which you've been talking about, is really important at this point in time. And I think there is a little bit of a room to breathe and get that done.
The space is probably good.
Yeah.
A few years ago, you would hear companies kind of standing at the top and screaming from the mountaintop that they were doing things. They were focused. They said it was because of their customer demand, their employee demand. Investors were demanding it of it, and so it was this momentum. Do you see those still being the drivers, or is it something else?
There's not obviously the public pressure, or if it is, they don't have to pay attention to it, right? They've been sort of given a pass on paying attention, at least in the U.S., to public pressure. I think they're keeping their heads down. They're not making new commitments, but I still think they're hearing it from their customers, right? Because the customers also know that a day of reckoning will come. And so they don't want to get caught out somewhere in the system. I think supply chains for a lot of companies are a very complicated piece of this puzzle. And sometimes you might be a big company, a very big company, a global company, but some of your supply chains are very small. And sort of how they're navigating through all of this, and then you layer in things like tariffs, is very, very challenging. And I thought a number of the CSOs talked about just worried about their supply chains and their ability to make sure that what they need their supply chains to be doing is in fact still happening.
Yes. I was thinking about that pathway having certainty, which I think most people that have lived in markets argue that that's probably the most important thing. If you have certainty, then you can build towards it. And some of the things we were talking about earlier today around hydrogen, which we're proud to be working with some folks on, and nuclear power, there's this, these are long-term investments. Their policy should be, trying to invest and think about something that has an ROI that's maybe a decade or longer in some cases, is hard to wrap your brain around. Do you see companies being able to make that leap and make those decisions, or are they?
Yeah, this is tough, right? I mean, and certainly my experience as being a regulator is that certainty was the most important thing. We would frequently be looking at setting a new standard for a particular sector, and what we would find is that we could set a tougher standard, a more productive standard. We had to meet the law and the science, but if that's what that allowed for, if we allowed greater flexibility in what the companies would have to do to meet this standard. And it was kind of a nice marriage of, what the science was telling us was we needed this to protect the public health, but what the companies were saying is, okay, we get it, but now give us some flexibility in getting there. And I think, right now we're not getting any regulatory certainty. And we're not getting the investments in the new technologies that regulatory certainty can bring you. So when I was at EPA, which was forever ago, but doing the tailpipe emissions and the catalytic converters round one, I think I did 2 and 3, there was one before me. But that industry, they were so happy every time EPA tightened a standard because now they had an opportunity. And we forget sometimes that regulations aren't just perhaps a burden on the regulated. They also create a business opportunity. And I think when we saw all of the IRA, or not all, but the majority of the IRA tax credits disappear, that was it's created a huge amount of uncertainty, both in terms of the companies who were directly going to benefit from, but also in terms of the capital stacks for investors, because there's no credit there.
Well, let's go that direction for a little bit, the IRA. So last year you were sitting here with us.
Boy, it was a different time.
Yeah, it was a very different time. We were talking about what it might mean to, the new administration might mean to energy transition broadly. Many of those projections came true. The efforts to roll back the IRA and other EPA policies like the Endangerment Act. In your view, how much of the federal activity policy drives all market behavior? And then the second piece, do you see states or other efforts kind of pushing back, and how do you see the interplay in this current administration?
So I think you're being very kind, because I'm sure what I said was, they never mess with tax credits from a Democratic to a Republican administration. I was wrong. They messed with all of the tax credits with a few notable exceptions. So yes, a couple of, I guess what we're going to find out is without the government providing the guardrails and the certainty and the tax credits, et cetera, is there enough of the private sector commitment to sustain the markets? You tell me. I mean, that's sort of where we are right now.
Yeah, I think there's, in my view, where we're going on energy transition is very, very clear. So it's sort of like climate, and where we go with policies around the world is changes a lot. It's a little bit more like weather. So you see kind of like this movement of policy, but the long-term trend is there. And you'll see it in this room here, and the folks that have been in over the last several days, and as you mentioned, there's people still here at Climate Week doing what they were doing before. And we're seeing people invest and drive in that, but a lot more cautiously than they had in the past. And maybe some of the new infrastructure ideas or new product or whatever service, it's harder to get off the ground. If you were trying to talk to investors and get them to go. But I think long term, a lot of people still see that the trend's very clear. It's just how long do you need to wait for that trend to be realized?
I mean, we may get a bit of a signal in the midterm elections that things could change again. I mean, I think we're in a period of time globally, not just in the U.S., where it's going to be like this. Yeah. But I guess the question is the overall like that? In terms of the states, we're seeing some states look at maybe stepping up. There are 18 attorney generals that have joined together from more conservative states, or all conservative states, that, for example, have led the effort on the banking issues. Banks can be regulated at the state level, and has really created a lot of confusion, I think, for banks in terms of their climate commitments, and whether or not they have screens on oil and gas investments and other things like that. So I think you used to see when Washington, if you look back over the last 30 years, when Washington would sort of back off of environmental protection, and we're talking about the more traditional air, water, soil, the states would really kind of step in, because it wasn't like the public stopped asking for clean air and clean water. That's not as consistent now as it used to be.
Yeah, we've seen that as well. Maybe California re-upping its EU. I mean, it's ETS, not EU.
Right.
It's ETS. But then you see some states that in the RPS maybe reset, and some of them are under challenge. So we at Expansive haven't seen quite the states step up at the same level that they had last time around.
Well, I think you mentioned to me Connecticut.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Resetting
the RPS.
Maybe that had to do with the Orsted decision, because they were counting on a significant portion. You guys know what Orsted is? Orsted is the almost done wind project that I think Connecticut was going to get a third of the energy. It was an offshore wind project that the administration killed. And literally it was like all the stuff was on the shore ready to go.
It seems that wind is particularly under assault.
I think solar is not far behind.
I was going to say, but I was going to ask you about solar.
I'm working hard to get my tax credits by the end of the year.
You're going to build
Put
on top of your house?
Put a few panels up, yeah.
Yes. But as I mentioned at the very beginning of the day, over 90% of all the new generation that came on the grid last year was renewable. To me, that's a trend that is more than policy that's driving that.
If you have an increase in energy, you know this better than me, but if you have an increase in energy demand, the fastest thing to get out there are your solar panels, right?
They're smaller, easier to
assemble, put them outside. Yeah.
On the siting point, it's obviously one of the things always raised about problems for the environmental communities, put that no wall up there. I guess maybe one of the questions is, there's a lot of kind of doom and gloom story about here in the U.S. about development, but where might there be kernels of positive, where things might be things that we can say there's new opportunities, or something's got out of the way, or there's an area that's really kind of robust and growing that you see?
It's a hard one. I think we have to start having those conversations, which is where are those areas of agreement, so that I was surprised when the transmission line went down. I'm forgetting the name of it. Do you remember the big one? It was sited. Everything was done.
Oh, yeah.
And then the administration killed it.
Coming out of the...
But, so if you go back and look at that, it was going through states that were getting no benefits, right? So a bunch of lines are going to come across, and they're not getting any of this clean energy. But it had been worked through. And I think it's probably a lesson in how you can do this. I think it's super unfortunate that you then had sort of the politics of the moment step in. So I think that it didn't end well. It had ended well, and then it got reversed. Was I think a sort of a story of how do you do this? And it was going through Democrat, Republican states. It was coming a long ways.
Yeah, it's what practical steps do you see companies, investors, and advocates take to sort of drive the momentum, or move the momentum, the pendulum back, or whatever phrase you want to use, in a direction that's towards a cleaner future? Is there any?
So there's an article in the New York Times today, I don't know if people saw it, talking about a more progressive group saying that they're counseling people running for office not to talk about climate change and not to talk about other issues that they think are divisive. It's interesting because the head of the group used to work for Harry Reid, who, when he was a senator from Nevada and head of all the senators,
Yep.
couldn't have been more clean energy focused than almost any of his colleagues. He was an advocate, he's from Nevada, an advocate for clean energy. But one of his former staffers has launched this organization. And it's being read by some, there's lots of chatter about it today, as saying, yeah, see, if we can't talk about climate, we can't do climate. If you actually delve into the story a little bit more, and then there's a poll that goes with it if you look at the poll, what they're saying is, if you want to connect with voters, climate is not a conversation they want to have. They want to have the affordability conversation. They're open to having the clean energy conversation. And so I think, how we engage the public in the sort of democratic process, and I'm not talking about the Democratic Party versus Republican Party, but then the democratic process is hugely important. And so how we talk about these issues, it has to resonate with people in a way that, for whatever reason, climate just doesn't.
If they're successful, and well, not just them, but and the House flips, do you think that'll have any impact on climate policy here in the U.S.?
Well, they won't be able to pass anything,
yeah.
And that's kind of significant, right? If you can't pass, like you wouldn't have been able to pass the big beautiful bill, right? So I think that at least stems the tide, if you will. There will be accountability for the administration, and I spent a lot of time testifying before Congress back in my day. It's an unpleasant experience, very. They do it differently than I did it. I don't remember yelling at the senators, but that seems to be allowed now. So I think that will at least shine a light. And people don't like to be shamed, and so we may see at least some slowdown. But I think the real question for me is, how do we engage the public in the conversation about the things we need to address? And I said earlier, whether it's housing, climate, affordability. We've been having the wrong conversations, and we need to change that. And this is where I give the president a lot of credit. He had a conversation with his voters that resonated, and he found the places where they were, and he went there, and then maybe moved them somewhere. I think we haven't always done that on our issues. We've just thought the science would prevail. Science is important, and it should prevail. But it's not something that the average person, I think, spends a lot of time being able.
Yeah, well, we could dig into that a fair bit.
We could talk about vaccines.
Yeah. We have just a few minutes left. I wanted to ask more of an open-ended question. We looked at last year. We kind of talked about what it might look like come here, but now as you look ahead in the next year, what gives you hope? What do you think we might be talking about in a year's time?
I have to say, I've been here, now 24 hours at the Climate Week. I was surprised at the commitment that companies are still, they're keeping their heads down, they're doing their work, but they're doing it. And I'm sure there are companies backing off, and I'm sure they're not doing everything they promised to do. But I expected a lot more hand-wringing, and we can't do this. And I find that, encouraging. And I think the fact that the investors are still out there. There may not be as many deals as they had hoped for, and they certainly don't have the tax credits to take advantage of. But 3 or 4 years ago, when I came to Climate Week and I went to the COP, I thought, wow, the money's shown up. It's a whole new world we're living in, as opposed to 10 years ago when we were thinking about these issues. And so, if I'm disappointed by something, one of the people I had lunch with, one of the CSOs is from one of the large car companies. And they explained that they just can't sell their EVs. They can't give them away, simply can't. And I was asking what the issue was, and she said, well, it's sadly become a red-blue state issue. And it's like owning an EV is woke. And you and I were talking earlier, I own 2 EVs. Wouldn't you own one, you would never go back, right? It's hard to understand. But that sounds like such a sad commentary on where we are. And I think, take the hope that I have from the CSOs talking about their ongoing commitment, and then think about half the public, think that EVs are somehow or another woke. That's what we have to bridge.
We have to make this not political.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be a red-blue thing. It should be a human thing.
Yeah. And I think, as I said when I started on the why, the what, and the how, I think it is the why going from the morality to materiality. I still have the morality, but the materiality is what will endure over time. And it can't be labeled as easily a red-blue.
On that, I'd
Thank
like to say thank you for being here again. Always great to
different
talk
times.
with you. Yes. Yes, in different times, but
Yes.
always great to
We'll
talk
do it
to
again
you.
next year and see what the times are like.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And maybe I hand it over to Jessica to give the logistics here.
Yeah, well, first of all, Carol, thank you again for coming back this year. It was such a good conversation. We had to follow up with you. So thank you all for coming today. And we hope that, everyone got something, out of each session and appreciated all the different perspectives. So we just want to thank everyone for attending today and, for all of our speakers. Just thank you all. Following this keynote, we're going to head down the street to the consulate. We have signs everywhere for Expansive, so you can't miss it. It's about a 2-minute walk. So we'll head straight out of there. We have to be out of this space pretty soon because another Climate Week event is going on. So
That's good.
just feel free if you want to continue your conversations to do so at the consulate.